Well, welcome in. It is this Wednesday morning, Bishop on Air. Tons to get to with the live program. Of course, you can like, subscribe, and click that notification bell if you are interested in catching this each and every weekday morning or whenever we put videos out. But you can also support the show by telling your friends, sharing it up on social media, or by supporting some of the merchandise you see below on the YouTube link. You can also find more at bishoponair.com. Again, the website, bishoponair.com. We've got plenty to get to. Hold tight.
Some basic things like safety locks on guns so the kids can't play with them? Are we going to do anything basic like identifying people who should not even be considered owners of guns and take advantage of the gun store loophole? This, to me, is a fundamental issue, and it is a public health issue. It involves not hairstyles, it involves death by gunshot.
And by the way, they call it a public health crisis because they want to put supposed experts in charge of disarming. The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights is not a public health crisis.
That's a little bit of the back and forth from a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing yesterday on, quote, gun violence and the public health crisis that some say it is. Welcome in. Bishop on Air here with you on this weekday morning. You can follow along. Just search Bishop on Air on Facebook, YouTube, X. You can like, subscribe, and get that notification bell on YouTube. The number of subscribers continues to grow, and I'm definitely appreciative of that. But efforts to cast gun violence as a public health crisis getting some pushback in the U.S. Senate, as this was a subject matter hearing yesterday in Washington, D.C., where you had experts that Democrats brought forward and experts that the minority Republicans in the Senate brought forward to discuss the issue of violent crime being committed with a firearm. And we'll also touch on some of the statistics that there are, and as far as lawful gun owners and how much of them are the problem. But some interesting conversation had. Let's go ahead and jump right on into it. One of the chairs of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin, he started off with some statements and made his voice heard on the issue of violent crime, of individuals using a firearm. Some deem that a term called gun violence, but there's a lot of pushback on that rhetoric. So here's what Senator Durbin had to say about the idea of just, keeping people safe.
It starts with the knowledge that when that child goes to school, he's going to come home safe at the end of the day. If you can't answer that question affirmatively, what in the hell are the rest of the questions worth? This, to me, is a fundamental issue, and it is a public health issue. It involves not hairstyles, it involves death by gunshot. And it's going on in America every single damn day. And we have a responsibility to do something up here. Not just to say we need to fund the police more. I'll sign up for that. We need to deal with mental health counseling. I'll sign up for that as well. But are we going to do some basic things like safety locks on guns so the kids can't play with them? Are we going to do anything basic like identifying people who should not even be considered owners of guns and take advantage of the gun store loophole? That, to me, is an example of what we can do that's just common sense.
So again, the senator talking about what he calls common sense gun control. And he goes on to talk about other states that may be Republican-led that he says are taking steps to issue regulations on the legal ownership of firearms.
Some states have taken a lead on this, and some may be surprising. Is there any restriction on buying a gun in the state of Wyoming, one of the most Republican states in the United States? Yes, turns out they have a state law that says you have to be 21 years of age. We're still debating this on a national basis. Even a conservative Republican state like Wyoming thinks that makes common sense.
But that's something that's being challenged in the courts, and the U.S. Supreme Court could very much be the final determinant factor as to whether or not you can restrict the ownership of firearms to adults under the age of 21. and that's already been litigated to a degree in some of the courts across the country. So clearly, these types of ideas may just run afoul of the U.S. Constitution and the Second Amendment of the Bill of Rights, a civil liberty. So after hearing some of the language that was used, things like gun violence or trying to label violent crime with firearms as a public health issue, Senator Ted Cruz, he fired back pretty succinctly.
Today's Democrats, when it comes to guns, their objective is to disarm law-abiding citizens. They simultaneously embrace policies that release violent criminals from jail. They're not interested in locking up murderers. They're not interested in locking up gangbangers. They're not interested in locking up violent criminals. Instead, they systematically support policies that release violent criminals. By the way,
so Cruz goes on to talk about the various issues around addressing crime and the lack of some prosecutors across the country in large urban areas not wanting to go after crime. He even said that that's turned some Democrats into Republicans because the now Republicans who switched party say that the Democrats are just focused on the wrong issues here. Instead of going after the criminals and holding criminals accountable, you see efforts to essentially restrict firearms and the ability for law-abiding individuals or just non-violent individuals, because you do get into the issue of if you keep using that term law-abiding, well, what about if you go over the speed limit? You're breaking the law. If you do that, are you not a law-abiding citizen? So, you got to kind of, I guess, be really specific when you're talking about individual rights. But Cruz went on to address some of the other issues that he talks about are really the problem here when it comes to violent crime using firearms.
We have a mental health crisis in this country. I've repeatedly introduced legislation to improve school safety, to invest to double the number of police officers in schools. Democrats objected. To invest $15 billion in mental health counselors in schools. Democrats objected. Their priority is not stopping the criminals. Their priority is disarming law-abiding citizens. And by the way, they call it a public health crisis because they want to put supposed experts in charge of disarming you. The Second Amendment in the Bill of Rights is not a public health crisis. What is a public health crisis is the crime rates that are skyrocketing because Democrats keep letting murderers and violent criminals out of jail.
So again, Cruz goes on to discuss this issue, saying that there's some false choices being presented, that you have to go after gun control in order to curb this, when he says there's a mental health issue that needs to be focused on. You had some of the experts there, including Amy Swearer. She is a attorney with the Heritage Foundation, does deep dives into a whole host of things, and she shared some of her thoughts as experts in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday.
Put aside that the end goal of many of those pushing the public health framing is often either to use crisis language as an end run around the Constitution or to pathologize the right to keep and bear arms. Put aside, too, that the public health lens is not particularly useful for understanding and addressing a problem that stems at its core not so much from a lack of insight into how violence affects health as from a lack of adequately enforcing criminal laws and utilizing existing mental health frameworks. If we take the issue of gun violence seriously from a public health perspective, none of the problems or solutions have changed. A public health framework doesn't change, for instance, the fact that most gun crimes are perpetrated not by ordinary lawful gun owners, but by a small subset of repeat offenders who are already prohibited from owning guns. It's still the case that if our policing, bail, and prosecutorial policies immediately spit these repeat violent offenders back into the community without pursuing criminal prosecution or punishment, they will predictably keep committing violent crimes.
She goes on to lay out a whole host of issues when it comes to violent crime and the foul lines that could be crossed if somebody tries to implement gun control efforts that could run afoul of the Second Amendment. And again, How often have we talked about the myriad cases there are, not just in Illinois, challenging the magazine and gun ban here in this state and the registry, which, by the way, really haven't seen any updates. We'll try to get some of that out for you as those updates happen. But in the litigation against Illinois' gun ban and registry. But she also later on in the Q&A with some of the senators talked about previous research the Heritage Foundation had done in other states where individuals' concealed carry licenses may have been revoked, and how the total number of a state's concealed carry license being revoked, those who got the concealed carry license and the very small, minuscule, percentage of those who had them revoked. She says it goes on to show that the individuals who are gun owners going through it in the proper channels are not the problem. And something I guess that kind of highlights some of that as well is from Illinois State Police. They released earlier this week a clear and present danger report. And these are the reports that Illinois State Police file on individuals, or local law enforcement can file on individuals. And it pretty much says that somebody's a clear and present danger, and they shouldn't have access to a firearm, so it could prohibit them from getting a firearm owner identification card. And in the state of Illinois, that's required for you to own and buy handguns, rifles, shotguns, and ammunition. If you don't have a FOID card and you're in possession of any of the firearms or ammunition, you're violating Illinois state law. But you see here that Illinois State Police talked about, the clear and present danger reporting system and going through and receiving a total of 10,144 clear and present danger reports from law enforcement, school administrators, and medical professionals, resulting in 4,212 FOID revocations or application denials. So of the 10,000 reports submitted, 4,900 individuals did not have a FOID card. So you could see here that, compare this number, 4,200 FOID revocations or application denials. Thinking about how there are 2.4 million FOID card owners in the state of Illinois, and looking back at that number of 4,200 revocations based off clear and present danger reports, that's comparable to the number of people who have registered firearms, and that right now is a little over 4,000, so that's 0.17%. So this is right about 0.18% of FOID card owners who have had some kind of clear and present danger report against them having their card revoked in the state of Illinois. That's minuscule. That's not even, a 0.5% of total FOID card holders. So some may see that as an indication that it's not those who are going through the proper channels that are the problem when it comes to firearms being used in violent crimes or being, quote, clear and present danger. But anyway, I just wanted to highlight some of that because that, of course, is interesting reporting from the Illinois State Police that they put out about the clear and present danger reports. But back to the U.S. Congress with the Senate Judiciary Committee. Amy Swearer from the Heritage Foundation talks about some of the regulations that have been proposed and how she says, quite frankly, that's just not going to solve some of the problems.
It certainly doesn't change the fact that most of the gun control restrictions commonly proposed to deal with criminal violence and suicide, things like assault weapons bans, magazine capacity restrictions, punitive public carry laws, and so on, are not even remotely designed to meaningfully address any major factors underlying crime or suicide. And a public health lens doesn't fix the constitutional or practical concerns about implementing these policies, nor does it erase the fundamental importance of the right to keep and bear arms to the natural right of self-defense.
So that conversation went on. It was about an hour and 20-minute long committee hearing yesterday. The Democrats had their experts there as well. Here is Dr. Megan Ranney. She talked about, seeing gunshot victims firsthand and treating all kinds of individuals who have been victims of violent crime by way of somebody using a firearm. And she said that, there needs to be regulations, similar to the regulations there are on vehicles and drunk driving.
Despite more cars being on the road, by quantifying the problem, identifying risk factors, developing multifaceted solutions ranging from reducing drunk driving to putting airbags in cars, and then by scaling what worked. Unfortunately, we have not yet consistently applied this approach to firearm injury. As a result, we are facing a growing epidemic. America's total number of gun deaths is the highest on record, and our rate nears its peak. Firearm deaths have surpassed breast cancer deaths in America. Firearms are now the leading cause of death for American children age 1 through 19. Although mass shootings get the most media attention, 2/3 of firearm deaths are preventable suicides, averaged over the last decade, like that young man I cared for 15 years ago. The remainder are mostly community violence and, to a lesser extent, domestic violence.
So she goes on to talk about some of the things that she wants to see implemented and in order to better attack what she says is a public health crisis.
First, help us get better data so Americans can better measure, predict, and evaluate this health crisis. You can make this happen, whether by funding data modernization for the CDC or by removing barriers to data sharing amongst state, territorial, and local partners, as Utah has done. Help us with federal funding for research to develop and evaluate solutions. At a minimum, continue current levels of appropriations for the NIH and CDC, but ideally appropriate more. Help us by supporting our scaling up and training of folks on things that do work. I'm happy to talk about this in Q&A. And finally, help our country have hope by demonstrating collaborative action, as you have done before.
So a lot of different points being made by all sides in this. And then some of the Q&A got interesting. Here's Senator Kennedy from, I think he's Louisiana, questioning Dr. Megan Rainey about, or is it Rainey, about, well, violent crime in some of these jurisdictions like the city of Chicago.
Why do you think that Chicago has become America's largest outdoor shooting range? Do you think it's because of Chicago citizens who have no criminal record, but who have lawfully a gun in their home for protection or perhaps for hunting? Or do you think it's because of a finite group of criminals who have rap sheets as long as King Kong's arm?
So Mississippi, Louisiana, and Missouri actually have higher firearm death rates. Obviously, there's certain...
What about Chicago?
So I don't live in Chicago. It's not my primary area of research.
You don't have an opinion on that?
I think there's easy access to firearms combined with environmental conditions, lack of great education. There have actually been studies showing that when you green vacant lots and repair abandoned buildings in urban neighborhoods, you see decreases in gunshots, in violence, as well as in stress and depression in the neighborhoods around them.
No disrespect, Doc, but that sounds a lot like word salad to me.
So again, that was just some of the back and forth yesterday at a U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on trying to cast, quote, gun violence as a public health emergency. And all that after we saw what happened, was it New Mexico, where the governor there tried to implement a public health emergency restricting individuals' ability to carry firearms. And that was quickly in the courts shot down. So, yeah, is that a tactic that's going to be used here? Trying to label gun violence as a public health concern and implementing executive orders. We saw what public health concerns around the COVID-19 virus brought about for well over 2 years during the pandemic, and all of the restrictions there were on First Amendment rights of gathering, of people being able to go to school, people being able to, say they don't want a certain type of medical treatment in order to keep their job. So all of that being done through the guise of, public health. And that's mean that we're going to see some kind of efforts to continue casting this issue as a public health crisis instead of as a issue of, bringing about more moral society and ensuring that people get the mental health treatment that they need and so on. Well, we'll keep a close eye on all of that. All right, appreciate you guys tuning in. All right, Bishop on Air. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell if you want to support the program. You can also, join us on YouTube and click on the link below and buy some merchandise. Hey, why not? All right, stay tuned.
This is the same political party that did not want to accept that President Obama was actually an American. It's the same Republican right-wing extremism that stormed the Capitol. It's the same right-wing extremism that refuses to accept the results of the Civil War. It's raggedy, it's disrespectful, it's mean-spirited, it's an unclean spirit, quite frankly.
This is just one small glimpse at a completely avoidable humanitarian disaster, wrought not by big bad Republicans in the House, but by an administration that refuses to enforce our immigration laws and has flung the door wide open at our southern border.
So, Mayor Brandon Johnson using some pretty heated rhetoric there for those calling to close the border. And a Republican congressman saying that it's not the issue of Republicans wanting lawful border control, but it's the issue of the border being wide open. Welcome back. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Buy some merch if you are interested, and get some coffee cups and some hoodies and whatever. So I appreciate your guys' support as we continue to grow. But yesterday, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, he held a news conference with faith leaders out of Chicago as the city has seen dozens of buses over the weekend, more than 24,000 non-citizens coming to Chicago from the southern U.S. border after crossing the border. Governor Pritzker says, hey, they are asylum seekers, and they are here legally. Well, they're here kind of on an interim legal basis, I guess. They still have to go through the asylum process. That requires getting an attorney and filing paperwork and such. But Mayor Johnson talking about getting these non-citizens some kind of housing, which is costing taxpayers tens of millions of dollars. And it's not just the cost for housing, it's the cost for food and healthcare and education as well. So these are obviously growing concerns for a humanitarian issue, but also growing concerns for the taxpayers in the state of Illinois. And we've seen the efforts of trying to have city buses in Chicago be warming stations. We've seen the flood of individuals in police station lobbies and sleeping in tents outside of police stations. We've seen the protests from people in Chicago saying that they have had enough, and they are not willing to be pushed off to the side for the resources that they need for their community while they see those resources going to non-citizens. And the questions about sanctuary state and sanctuary city policies and how that may be driving this ongoing crisis. But really, the crux of it comes down to the question of the border. Why is the border not being secured? Why have we seen upwards to 2, maybe 3 million individuals come across the border in just a handful of years under the Biden administration, dwarfing what was coming across the border during the Trump administration? Obviously, the Biden administration is handling border security in a different way, seeming to let people just walk right on through instead of turning them around at the border or going about and deporting people here illegally. You have seen some efforts to deport Venezuelans who are here past the, I think, July 31st date that the Department of Homeland Security has given temporary protected status to Venezuelans. But you've also got reports out there of continued crime being committed by some nefarious actors who are here as non-citizens. And all these non-citizens, are they really here legitimately seeking asylum, or are they using that asylum privilege to get into the country to maybe commit some crimes? So obviously the question of border security is still very much top of mind. Mayor Johnson yesterday talking about bringing the faith community in to provide more assistance. He was asked about, well, should we just go ahead and seal up the border? Should that be something? Republicans are pushing for that to be paramount, to seal the border, to close the border. And Johnson, he used some fiery rhetoric to go after the opposing party from the Democrats.
Well, it has to be better coordination. What we've seen is a very raggedy form instituted by right-wing extremism. Everyone knows that the right-wing extremism in this country has targeted democratically ran cities. And quite frankly, they've been very intentional about going after democratically ran cities that are led by people of color. And their whole motivation is to create disruption and chaos, because that's what that particular party has been about. Right? This is the same political party that did not want to accept that President Obama was actually an American. It's the same Republican right-wing extremism that stormed the Capitol. It's the same right-wing extremism that refuses to accept the results of the Civil War. It's raggedy, It's disrespectful. It's mean-spirited. It's an unclean spirit, quite frankly. And so I got you. I just want to make sure that people understand what we're facing. That's why it's so important that the faith community is leaning in this moment. And so what I've said, there has to be better coordination.
So Johnson went on to talk about a variety of examples of the faith community stepping up to help out. But you heard there he talked about the unclean spirits of those who are pushing for border control, to close the border of those crossing to either, legitimately claim asylum or to use that in an untruthful manner. But here's more of what Johnson had to say yesterday.
It is abysmal, and it's an affront for everything that is good about this country, for the extremism in this country to use people as political tools to settle political scores for something that happened 400 years ago. They're still mad that a black man is free in this country. This is nothing new, but aren't you glad that the soul of Chicago won't be broken? And those are the words of, I think, Beyonce, "You won't break our soul."
So I don't know if we can get through a Johnson news conference without him quoting Beyonce to some degree. Regardless, he was eventually later on asked about closing the border, and should that be part of this equation, and especially when you've got 25 buses that arrived in Chicago over the holiday weekend.
Oh, that's a good question. First of all, the control that we have in the city is doing what we're doing now. Yeah, I don't have control over what they're doing at the border. That would require me to be the president of the United States of America. Don't get too excited. So because we can't control the flow, I have to build up and prepare, regardless of what it looks like today. Because quite frankly, I believe it was between January and April of this year, 0 buses came, and there was very little preparation. We're not going to succumb to that element, right? We're going to continue to prepare. And as far as the churches, these are churches that are prepared to embrace them because that's what they've been doing. And
again, the news conference yesterday was more about the faith community and philanthropists coming together in Chicago to help provide some housing, as the state also is stepping up with tens of millions of dollars. We'll touch on that in a moment. But to the fiery rhetoric that Democrats are using, saying it's MAGA extremist, unclean, spirited, racist Republicans who aren't willing to address this issue properly. Republicans are saying that's not that. It's really the problem being a porous border. While the news conference was happening over in Chicago and Washington, D.C., you had a U.S. House hearing, a rules hearing in the U.S. House about there was a variety of different measures they were talking about, but one in particular that I tuned into briefly and just happened to catch was a law that they're hoping to pass to restrict the federal government's use of public parks to house migrants. And apparently that's something that has been happening, and U.S. House Republicans want to restrict the Biden administration's ability to use public lands in this fashion to house non-citizen arrivals. New York Representative Langworthy, he talked a bit about this and really went after the idea that it's the big bad Republicans, he says, that are trying to make this problem worse and dividing the country over this issue.
See the footage of what's happening in America's cities, and they see the footage at the border, and they just scratch their head as to why isn't the administration doing the obvious, which is just shutting down the border. But thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate you reiterating these points for us today, because we cannot just act like this is an inevitable and unavoidable flood of illegal migration when we know for a fact that it's this administration and the sanctuary policies of Governor Kathy Hochul in New York and Mayor Adams in New York City. They are directly responsible for the mess that New Yorkers, like my own constituents, New York State taxpayers, are stuck to deal with. And I'd like to also address the repeated claims by colleagues on the other side of the aisle that this legislation is cruel or callous or inhumane or whatever other adjective that they'd like to use. To quote a recent article on the encampment of illegal migrants at Floyd Bennett Field, it was reported that, quote, parents say they swaddle their children in bed sheets but can't stop them from shivering through the night as they tried to fall asleep in tents. This is just one small glimpse at a completely avoidable humanitarian disaster, wrought not by big bad Republicans in the House, but by an administration that refuses to enforce our immigration laws and has flung the door wide open at our southern border. Children should not be shivering in the night at Floyd Bennett Field in New York City, and they wouldn't be if this administration and Democrats in New York and other so-called sanctuary states and cities would acknowledge the true harm and destruction that their policies have brought on Americans and immigrants alike.
And again, that's the porous southern U.S. border being the issue that Republicans raise as the main reason why we're dealing with this. And cities complaining about getting these influx of non-citizens. They're sanctuary cities. And they've set up policies that say, hey, you're welcome here, regardless of your immigration status. It's not an effort to say you're welcome here only for those who are seeking asylum. It's you're welcome here regardless of your immigration status. But again, all of this comes with not just the humanitarian toll with winter. It's pretty cold out there, guys. And sleeping in a tent in the street of Chicago doesn't sound very humanitarian, but that's kind of where we're at, right? I mean, warming buses and military base camp tents and temporary shelter for the tens of thousands that have arrived. More are on the way. Obviously, a lot of costs associated with that as well, not just the humanitarian toll, but the taxpayer cost. Governor J.B. Pritzker yesterday was asked about the transparency issues around taxpayer spending on this. If you recall, about 11 days ago, he announced $160 million additional dollars going to be used for a variety of services for non-citizens, from wraparound services to housing and such. Yesterday, he talked about, well, that's apparently going to have to bring about some kind of supplemental spending authority that state legislators are going to have to bring about.
We've put it out. I think what we're trying to do is use all the line items that are necessary at the Department of Human Services in order to fulfill the needs in this humanitarian crisis. You know, people, if you want to nitpick about what's happening, also ask yourself, if you want us to delay, then the 15 degrees is going to have a bigger impact on these families because they're all going to be outside for a lot longer than you'd like. So I want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can. Obviously, those are going to be parts of a budget discussion with the General Assembly. We have made it available to the General Assembly to vote on if they wanted to have a supplemental in order to provide dollars for this, or to do it during the veto session, or in the regular session during January to May. It'd be great if we could end in March, but January to May, and so those are decisions that the General Assembly will make, with us going forward.
So obviously, the indication is we're going to see more taxpayer spending. We've already spent hundreds of millions. You've got the healthcare costs that have been budgeted for $550 million, but it's projected to cost $830 million, I believe, plus the tens of millions for housing. And the costs just keep stacking up. If you recall, we talked with State Representative Brad Halbrook about a week and a half ago or so, and he addressed how they're seeing it's going to be more than $700 million, if not close to $1 billion of extra spending on top of what taxpayers are already spending. And that's a lot of funds, a lot of money that should be going towards, I don't know, like pensions or other social services that taxpayers demand. Here's State Representative Brad Halbrook talking about the costs and how it's just getting to a tipping point.
It appears that in the BIMP bill, right, the budget implementation plan that was passed in May, the governor has always had authority to move budgets or numbers around up to 4%. But in this BIMP bill, I don't know if anybody knows this yet, but it allows the governor to double the amount of money that he can move, 8% that he can move on line item to line item. And I think that's just staggering. Okay. So I think that's troubling. I mean, when you take a almost $51 billion and say the governor now can move up to 8% of that, is that like 4.5? Maybe let me back up. If it's nearly a $51 billion budget, and if the governor can move around nearly 8% of that, that's $4.5 billion, I believe.
It's a lot of money, no question about it. State Representative Brad Halbrook with us here with Bishop on air, talking about the latest in funding for the migrant issue. Do you think that the cost controls the governor talked about before the start of the fiscal year, the co-pays for undocumented migrants getting subsidized healthcare coverage, the ability to cut off some of the new enrollees for the subsidies over those age 65 and older. Are those going to amount to really anything?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that one yet, and I guess that one yet remains to be seen. But I think something that is worth noting that in the governor's own management and budget office last week, they rolled out the fact that there's going to be $1 billion+ of additional pressures on this current fiscal year, and that they'll probably be seeking a supplemental appropriation come this spring. So I don't know how this is all going to play out in the final analysis, but it looks like the governor's on a spending spree. He's allowed to move double the amount of money than anybody in the previous history. And so this is just going to put more and more pressure on taxpayers. Now, they'll argue the point that revenues are increasing, but at some point in time, there's a tipping point here.
And that tipping point, obviously something that is concerning for a lot of people. All right. It is Bishop on Air. Thanks for hanging out. We've got a few more segments, but if you follow along live, you can obviously catch up on things later on as we segment out these videos. So be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here on YouTube. You can watch it live on Facebook and on X, formerly known as Twitter. So I appreciate all the supports, and be sure to visit the store at bishoponair.com if you want to further support the show. So I appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll be watching all of these issues and more. All right, stay tuned. We'll talk about population in Illinois. Yeah, we've talked a lot about the non-citizens arriving, but we've got U.S. Census data that's going to be released next month to show the annual estimates, and Illinois has lost population for 9 consecutive years. So we'll talk about that next, all right? For 9 consecutive years, Illinois has lost population according to U.S. Census estimates, and some people saying that that's not the case. While we anticipate new numbers, new estimates from the U.S. Census sometime in the next 3 weeks, we'll see whether or not Illinois will have a straight decade of annual estimated population loss. And when you look at the stats, it's rather fascinating because it goes, I think I've been tracking this each and every year, so this is just from my memory. It was like 10,000 one year, and then it was like 25,000 the next year, and then it was like 30 or 40,000, and then 80,000, and then 90. And I think last year was over 100,000 people estimated to have lost from the state of Illinois to either other states or to other countries, and that's staggering. You're talking, like 500,000 over the span of 9 years estimated the state has lost. And when you look at the actual U.S. Census numbers for 2022, it says it's like 12.58 million people. That's down from the 12.8 some odd million people just a handful of years ago in the state of Illinois. But Democrats, they insist that the state's not losing population. They've actually written the U.S. Census demanding that the state's population be increased. But Governor J.B. Pritzker earlier this week with the Crain's Chicago Business publication talking about population, he said that people are looking at this in the entirely wrong way.
People who are down on Illinois are not looking at the right indicators of the future of our state. Our future is bright. We have more. Our enrollment numbers are some of the best in our universities and colleges, are some of the best in the country now.
So the governor has downplayed population decline time and again, and ultimately has said that it's not as bad, or even arguing that it's not happening, that we're not losing population. But it's not just Illinois. You've got Democrat-controlled states across the country that have lost population. And Illinois, we've seen not just U.S. Census data to that effect. We've seen moving company data that's released annually, showing that indeed Illinois often leads the nation, if not right up there at the top of the total number of people getting moving vans to leave the state. You've also seen it in IRS migration data. data that's released every year showing that Illinoisans are not just losing people, but billions of taxable income. So that's another impact here. Earlier this week, I talked with Marcus Evans outside of the Illinois State Board of Elections, where he was taking questions and getting ready to file his nominating petitions. And he talked a bit about the population issue after I asked if that's a problem that needs to be addressed. Here's some of that exchange with Marcus Evans.
It's my understanding that we're not losing the population, but the biggest thing is let's focus on continue to gain, bringing new jobs here, creating good job climates, making sure it's high quality jobs, and making sure we take care of people who are struggling to make them productive. So if we could focus on what we're doing, the population will continue to grow. But we are still the United States of America. We're not fighting the next state, and sometimes that does bother me. When I travel across the world, it's one country, but sometimes we get into these unnecessary state battles. We are the United States of America, so some of these population battles are kind of frivolous. As long as they're in the United States, we should be happy, right? I mean, I think so.
It's a good, I guess, talking point. But as I said, you've got IRS migration data that shows Illinois is losing tax dollars to the tune of billions of dollars. So that's a significant issue, and that takes away resources from the state of Illinois. I also talked with Congressman Mike Bost briefly earlier this week and asked him about population decline and how to address it in the state of Illinois.
As a congressman, all I can do is make sure that my legislation or the things I vote on make sure that it causes a economic growth in this nation. What the state of Illinois has done, you need to talk to your state legislators, because I've been warning about that for years, and I've watched the population leave the state of Illinois. But here's what's really wild. If you remember, in 1995, the Republicans had control of the House, control of the Senate, and every statewide office. We paid our bills on a 28-day pay cycle, and our long-term indebtedness was less than $20 billion. Our net debt now is $132 billion, and people are leaving the state. And your members of Congress, the amount of members of Congress you have shows that. Of course, I'm from a very unique situation in the fact that my district is the most Republican district in the state of Illinois. It's how they rate it is.
And he goes on to talk about the politics of his district, but regardless, he highlights how indeed the state's losing population because we're losing seats in Congress. We have 17 U.S. House seats in the state of Illinois, 17. 30 years ago, we had 22 House seats. So every 10 years after the decennial census, you've got reapportionment that happens, and Illinois, over the past 30 years, has continued to lose population and apportionment to where we've gone from 22 U.S. House seats, that's influence in the U.S. Congress, to 17 U.S. House seats. So we'll be anticipating the reporting from annual estimates of the U.S. Census state by state. So that should come out sometime, maybe a week or so before Christmas. So we'll be revisiting this issue, no question about it. All right. Again, Bishop on air here. Thanks for hanging out. Coming back, we've got the council roundup, a review of the Springfield City Council meeting. I should say the council corral. So let's go ahead and get on into that. Council Corral, a review of the Springfield City Council meeting each and every week, be it a committee of the whole, as it was last night, or a full City Council meeting, as it was last week. We kind of highlight what's going on at Springfield City Hall. And in a way, even for those of you who don't live in or around Springfield, I think it's instructive just to kind of look at some of the major issues that are facing your elected officials on a local level. Now, of course, not every jurisdiction is a municipality. Some are villages, so there are different makeups as far as just who exactly is an elected official there. Is it a board trustee, or is it an alderperson that has wards? So there's different types of makeups for local governments. But as we move on with the council corral here, it's I think something that we need to just remind people. Local government impacts you on a local basis considerably. From the public works and making sure your sewers are up to grade, or making sure that you have sufficient law enforcement or firefighters in some municipalities like Springfield, for instance. So a lot of focus on a variety of things. But last night, there was an interesting ordinance up for consideration during the Committee of the Whole, which in Springfield City Council is like, you've got ordinances that are proposed, and they go through, 3 readings essentially, right? First reading published on a Friday before a Committee of the Whole. Then they get to a second reading during the Committee of the Whole where they either put it on a consent agenda or they put it on a debate agenda. Consent agenda is lumping them all together to where they pass them all at once on third reading at a full city council meeting. They put it on the debate agenda, then they debate those one by one during the full city council meeting for final passage on third reading. So last night is a Committee of the Whole. So Friday, they had the publication of all the ordinances, and I think there were like 28 ordinances, and they go through during a Committee of the Whole, and they, play traffic cop as to is it going on consent or is it going on debate. So these are all up for consideration as to consent or debate. One in particular, kind of fascinating, a $1.2 million settlement for a parcel of property in Springfield to deal with rail relocation. And this is after a jury verdict. So what's going on here is a question that was asked on the City Council Committee of the Whole last night. And what exactly is going on here?
We had a jury verdict. What's the story with this?
It's Alderman Hanna.
So this was a condemnation proceeding on a parcel of property on 9th Street that went to, we had a jury trial because the parties could not come to an agreed valuation. And this was that was the amount set by the jury. We're doing this agreed verdict and paying it so we can obtain title to proceed with the construction.
So clearly the rail relocation, we've seen a lot of properties that have been essentially transferred of hands from the private owner to maybe the city or the county that's dealing with rail relocation, upgrading the rail lines through Springfield. So it's been a years-long process. And I've seen houses and properties go for $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000, but $1.2 million is interesting because it was a number that was brought about through court action. So apparently, and I don't know the complete background, but there was a difference of opinion about the property and what its value was, especially if eminent domain is going to be considered in these types of cases. You maybe have to go to a jury and have them spell out what's going on. So interesting to see that. Another line item for spending brought up last night, the Committee of the Whole.
Of contract number PW 24-06-35 with AFE Construction, LLC, for the construction and addition and roof at the African American History Museum in an amount not to exceed $822,225 for the Office of Public Works.
Motion for consent.
Second.
So that was put on the consent agenda, and it's $822,000 for a roof for the African American History Museum here in Springfield. There was an additional $220,000, I believe, that was put on the consent agenda for that organization as well. So, just the spending levels involved here. You have other issues that were brought up, including bringing about a lobbyist for the city of Springfield. Jessica Basham with Basham Government Solutions is going to be brought on for a total cost of $75,000. And the city had, under the previous administration, a different lobbying outfit. But Basham Government Solutions, Jessica Basham is a former high-ranking officer for former House Speaker Michael Madigan. She would believe was the chief of staff for Madigan in the final couple of years of his tenure as the longest-serving House Speaker. Madigan's now facing 23 federal corruption charges, 22 of which he goes on trial for up in Chicago in April. If you recall, it's the ComEd 4 and Madigan involved and, pay-for-play type stuff and using his official office for private gain. Those are the allegations. He's pleaded not guilty, but those who have pleaded not guilty also in the ComEd 4, they were found guilty. Even Madigan's former House clerk was found guilty of lying to the FBI about that whole stuff. Anyways, Jessica Basham, now out of the public sector in the private sector as a lobbyist. It looks like she's going to be getting the job at $75,000 to lobby for the city of Springfield. Here's some of what she had to say last night.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Jessica Basham with Basham Government Solutions. I know that you've all been provided a document with some of my background and experience information. I won't go into details about that unless there's any questions, but what I will say is I am incredibly excited about the opportunity to represent the city as a lifelong resident of the city of Springfield. I'm also very excited to sit down with each of you and talk about some of the priorities that you have for your own wards.
So she goes on to talk about the efforts of lobbying at the State House, but for those who aren't familiar, there's this organization called the Illinois Municipal League, and it's an association very much like the Manufacturers Association or the Firefighters Association. It's an association, a private entity that has municipalities as dues-paying members. And the Illinois Municipal League lobbies at the State House for municipalities and looks at state laws that might be impacting municipalities. So the Illinois Municipal League is a lobbying arm. Alderman Brad Carlson asked an interesting question. Why are we bringing on a lobbyist here? Aren't we members of the Illinois Municipal League in the city of Springfield?
Are we members of the IML, the Municipal League?
Yes.
Okay. And what do we pay a year to them?
Good question.
Corporation Council.
It's a very minimal amount.
Okay.
I can get you the
Yeah, I'm just curious. I'm curious. Yeah.
And I think it's way less than $75,000. So regardless, the thinking is that having a dedicated lobbyist for the city of Springfield, they'll be able to delve into more Springfield-specific issues, because Springfield has a city-owned electric generation facility, City Water, Light, and Power. It's owned by the city. It's a coal-fired power plant. So that's makes the city of Springfield unique. Springfield's also the capital city. So a lot of different things, and as far as, the city losing out on property tax dollars because there's a lot of government facilities in the city of Springfield. So that makes it unique as well. So there's a lot of other different types of things that, Springfield specifically needs a lobbyist for. But you had Alderman Redpath ask an important question about something that's more of a larger issue, not just for the city of Springfield, but for other municipalities. And that's the ongoing exorbitant cost for first responder public safety pensions, those who retire from the police force or those who retire from the fire department. They obviously have pensions, and the funding of those pensions takes a lot of resources, and it's continuing to escalate. Even in the city of Springfield, I don't know the exact number, but I think it's like $200+ million of unfunded pension liability just for police and fire pensions. That's just for the city of Springfield. So Redpath asked a question about what she can do as lobbyists for the city of Springfield to go to the State House to try to find some resolution here.
So since I've been on the city council, the biggest issue that we've faced is the pension issue with our police and fire. You and I have had a discussion about that, and I know that this is a critical situation for every municipality around the state. Do you foresee any kind of movement that we can provide to get the legislature to look at the extension of our time frame for when we have to fund our pensions?
Well, Alderman, I'm sure you're aware, and as you just pointed out, it's a serious issue that has been discussed for a number of years in Springfield. I think it's a matter of continuing those conversations, looking for the right timing opportunity. So, I hate to say that governments have been flush with cash. There's never enough resources to meet all of the priorities, but these last several years have been, an opportunity for a lot of municipalities to grow a lot of reserves. Obviously, some are in better position than others, but that's probably likely to change in the next several years.
Well, the whole culture of the legislature's changed over the last few years, and things are different now. Is there any opening for us to make a move to try to get that to not force that issue, because we don't want to force anything on them. But anyway, to get the discussion started, because it is a problem for us. And every year we battle how much money that we're going to put into the pension system. And we've already got a request this year to put a lot more in there. And, there's only enough money just to go around. And we just got to make sure that we do our best to try to move that along if we could.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. With the changing legislature and changing dynamics, there's always an opportunity to seek out those discussions and hopefully become more successful than
I think you're the person
years.
for the job, by the way. So.
We'll watch how that plays out. Of course, I'm at the State House covering that for the Center Square in my full-time gig. So that's clearly something that we hear about all the time is pension issues. But what's being talked about there is what some say is kicking the can down the road. Because you got a pension ramp that by 2040, I believe it is, or 2045, you got to get to 90% funding. 90% funding. But you look at the state's pensions, it's only about 45% funded. You look at the consolidated public safety pensions that's currently in front of the Illinois Supreme Court. You've got the consolidated pension funds that's about 50+% funded, I think, and it's different for each municipality. But regardless, that's an ongoing issue. Is the answer to, quote, kick that can down the road? Or is it to maybe open up the Illinois Constitution to reduce benefits? Or maybe it's to use more tax dollars to upload and front load the unfunded liability so that it doesn't continue to take away resources? These are all important questions. Ongoing with the council corral, you've got another ordinance in front of the Springfield City Council concerning the fire department. And in particular, you've got more spending requested by the Springfield Fire Department.
An ordinance authorizing a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $1,014,500 to cover additional salary costs in FY24 for the Springfield Fire Department.
Move to consent.
Second.
So that's put on consent agenda, and Fire Chief Canny was there to talk about the need to cover overtime costs.
So when we budgeted last year, we knew we were going to be short. Even at that time, Alderman Hanauer recognized that we were going to be short and added some money to our line at that time. And we knew because we haven't hired that overtime line was going to be was going to grow. With your report that I sent you last month and then the one I sent this month, you can see why it is and where those where we are hurting at. You know, not having enough people to staff to meet that minimum manning that's required causes overtime.
So clearly there's ongoing conversations about the overtime costs. And why we always run into this, listen, I've been covering the city council here in Springfield for like 12 or 13 years. And every year they pass a budget. Every year when they pass the budget, they talk about, well, we're always surprised by overtime costs. And then they pass the budget, and then months later, they're surprised by overtime costs. And the overtime costs, as you saw there, more than $1 million worth. Alderman Hanauer says, listen, we gotta change our tactics here. And instead of being surprised by this, we gotta budget this in.
I do want to bring up, and it's more for the upcoming budget, Mayor and Ramona, and that I think that we need to go back and look and see what our average of overtime was for the past 5 years. We've been playing this game where we know that the overtime's, let's say, $3 million, and we only put $1 million in their overtime. We know I said it back during budget season. I don't understand why we're playing this game. It makes our budget look good, but we know we're gonna get hit for this extra cost. You know, now I would like to see where we're at, how we've done this year compared to past years on overtime, because we have hired some people. We've hired a class the year before, and we keep hearing, well, we keep hiring, and overtime's going to go down. And I just want to see where we're at total compared to past years too. So
I'll be happy to get you a historical report over the past 5 years and see.
But I would just ask for budget. Let's be real about this on the overtime. This game of only putting $1 million in when we know that number isn't correct. I still don't understand why we did it unless it was to try to make the budget look better. I don't know, but
I can't answer that either.
Yeah. So
we gotta, I guess, be more clear and realistic with the issue of overtime. And it's, again, something that's perennial, happens every year. They pass the budget, and then they come back and say, oh, we have overtime costs. Some of that overtime cost being driven by minimum manning. And that's something that Alderman Chuck Redpath asked Chief Canny about. Minimum manning, what's going on there?
The minimum manning number, is that an executive decision or is that done by contract?
By contract.
Okay, thank you.
So just so it's clear, the minimum manning is negotiated in a contract with the firefighters union. So that's something that's driving the cost. Maybe that's something that could be ratcheted back a bit. You don't need, X number of firefighters to show up to a medical call, for instance. In Springfield, that happens a lot. You don't need an entire large fire truck to show up to a health emergency. Maybe a smaller truck with smaller staff can show up and help EMS who might show up. So clearly there's some ongoing costs, and all of this diverts away from maybe that's $1 million that could go into the pensions. Right? So interesting to see some of the conversations on a local level in the city of Springfield and how that could impact, say, your local government. Continuing on with the council corral here, it's Bishop on air. Thanks for hanging out. You had an ordinance up for consideration at this the Springfield Police Department for a robot. A mini caliber robot. What exactly is this mini caliber robot? That's costing $63,000 for the Springfield Police Department. Here is Police Chief Scarlett's taking that question and answering it.
Certain details I'd like to not disclose publicly, but
whatever you can. How's that?
Absolutely.
I did have someone ask me, why is the police department buying a robot?
Well, it's actually an essential part of a lot of the operations within our agency, specifically SWAT-related procedures. If there's anything that we can do to de-escalate situations to where it's not an officer on suspect encounter, then we certainly want to do that. And by sending in, technology components, we have drones, we utilize those also. We have canines, so this is just one more facet of that we can use in various job-related functions.
Thank you. And again, I had
So what is a mini caliber robot? If you just do a quick Google search, you can see it's one of these track type robots that has an arm on it, for instance. Probably, you can put several cameras on it. You can even, what's this? It looks like there's some kind of attachment there. Is that, what is that? Is that some kind of firearm device or something? So yeah, these are interesting robots used in a variety of different ways. Clearly, it's something that I think is interesting. The city of Springfield needs that, saying it's a useful tool. So again, just some of the spending and the conversations around it at the Springfield City Council meeting. All right, moving on now. It was time for, and only about a 50-minute meeting last night for the Committee of the Whole. So looking at the end of the meeting here, you had former Springfield Alderman Joe McMiniman. If you recall, last week with the Council Corral, we reviewed how there were a bunch of ordinances concerning police pay and pay increases and salary bumps and such. Alderman McMiniman, former alderman, he wanted to speak on each one of those, but he was only given 5 minutes, and he said that he was going to complain to the Attorney General's office. He was even going to go to the Inspector General because he felt that as a former alderman, he should have been given more time to be able to speak on each particular ordinance. But city rules say that you only have 5 minutes as a member of the public to address the city council. So they adhered to that, and he wasn't too happy. So he showed up last night to take another 5 minutes to talk about a variety of things. Here's former Springfield Alderman Joe McMiniman.
There were 3 ordinances having to do with the police, and one of those ordinances had to do with the collective bargaining agreement, and I've already mentioned what I said about that. I was very concerned about the 13% in 1 year and the impact it can have on encouraging retirements, and because people would want to spike their pension. And I don't mean to offend anyone when I talk about spiking the pensions, but when I came on the council and sat in Ward 7 seat, we worked hard to eliminate the fire pension spiking, the police pension spiking, and then I didn't realize that there was spiking going on with everyone else with IMRF at retirement. They were taking huge cash outs, and then that was being calculated into their pension calculation. I think Alderman Hanauer and some of the others remember that cleanup that we did.
And that was 12 years ago when that was a major issue, looking at pension spiking. And they did put some controls on it in Springfield, but you saw it happening elsewhere as well. So clearly that's an ongoing issue that Alderman McMiniman wanted to address when it comes to increasing the pay for police officers, especially those who are close to retirement, so that they can, as he says, spike their pension and to get even more as they retire. But he also talked about the increases that the mayor was given the ability to make for command staff at Springfield Police Department.
The other comment was last week the council passed an ordinance giving the mayor exclusive authority and discretion to grant senior police command staff whatever raise she wants to give them. And I think that departs too strongly from past practice where the mayor had to come to the city council to get approval for any pay raise above 5%. The way that ordinance is written, it's got no sunset clause. So this council gave the mayor authority to give unlimited pay raises to command staff not just during this 12-month period, but the next 12-month period and the next 12-month period, unless the council takes action. And there's no cap on those raises. It could be 10% to someone, 15% to somebody else, 20% to somebody else. There's no caps. And there's no accountability. There's no requirement that the mayor come back to the council and say, what has she just done? So, I was upset when Mayor Langfelder gave Chief Winslow a pay raise towards the end of his career to try to keep him here in the city. I was upset when Mayor Davlin gave then Chief Caldwell a late career pay bump right before he left city employment. He was, by the way, the first police officer that began earning a $100,000 a year pension. So I'm at 38 seconds. So this has nothing to do with our current chief. It has to do with accountability, transparency, and good budgeting. So,
interesting stuff. And that's your Council Corral here on this Wednesday, November 29th. I'm Greg Bishop. Thanks for hanging out and joining us each and every weekday morning live right here on YouTube, on X, on Facebook. If you missed any of the segments earlier, you can check that out. Go to the YouTube page and check out the segments throughout the day. We'll be back tomorrow morning. Have yourself a great day. Appreciate it.